Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So when I was in undergrad and even in high school and I was trying to decide what major to go into during undergrad, everybody kept telling me biomedical engineering, don't do it, it's the hardest major out there. And I definitely agree, biomedical engineering is hard. And people ask me all the time, how hard is it? What classes were the hardest? Can I actually do it? So today what I'm doing is I'm ranking every single one of my biomedical engineering pre-med classes that I took in undergrad so you can see which ones I thought were easy and which ones I thought were hard. So let's get started. I actually remember people telling me when I was in undergrad that BME stood for business majors eventually, which was actually true for some of my classmates. I had a pretty small class of 45 people, but we started out with quite a lot more. Now, what typically happens is people will either start with BME and then drop the major and go into a completely different major, or a lot of people will start out as BME Pre-Med and they will end up just dropping the Pre-Med part because they find it very difficult to combine all of the engineering classes with the pre-med classes, but I did it, so this is what it looks like. Let's show you all of the classes and which ones were the hardest. Alright, so starting with freshman year, the easiest class that I had freshman year was definitely Biomedical Engineering Introduction. This was a class where we just kind of got introduced to a bunch of different topics in BME, and I think I did a presentation on cataracts or contact lenses, I'm not sure. I'll pop things in and out from time to time so you can see what it looks like. After that, I took a French class. I'd been taking French since middle school and I loved it, so I thought French was super easy and it was definitely a fun class for me. Then we had Biology 1 and 2, which is obviously both a BME prerequisite as well as a pre-med rec. I thought biology, as long as you went to class, you put in the time to study, you were going to get a good grade. Then elementary statistics, I don't know why I took this class. It was not a requirement for my engineering. Maybe it was a pre-med requirement, but I thought it was an easy statistics class. It was like basic introduction. The teacher was pretty good, had clear objectives, so pretty straightforward math class. Engineering physics with lab, so this was definitely both a pre-med and BME requirement, and I like physics ever since high school and even middle school, so this was an easy class for me. It was kind of like review, and it was almost easier than my AP class from high school. Then we have Gen Chem 1 and 2. So I am not a big fan of chemistry. You will see my weaknesses, and one of them is definitely chemistry. I think from middle school I had a bad chemistry teacher, and ever since then I just never liked it. I found it to be more difficult to understand, but I did okay with it. It just was not my favorite. So because it wasn't my favorite, I found it to be harder. Intro to honors. So I was in the honors program in my undergrad, and we all got placed into random honors classes. And the one that I took was more of a humanities class, and it was about Catholicism. So we just ended up reading a lot of books that delved into Catholicism and religion, and then having to write reflective papers. And I am not good at reading or writing, so this was a hard class for me. And I found that, you know, professors grade how they want to and view essays how they want to. So this was kind of harder for me because there was no problem solving or definitive answer. It was kind of based on my professor. And finally, the hardest class of my freshman year was definitely Calculus 3. I took Calculus 1 and 2 in high school, but I found that it became progressively harder with Calculus 3. I also think the professor was not very good. They were very disorganized all over the place and kind of didn't like some students. So Calculus 3 was a hard class for me personally. Hardest one of freshman year. For sophomore year, let's start off with the easiest. We've got mechanics. I found mechanics to be super fun. You know, the teacher at one point said to me, "What are you doing? I can't keep making the test harder because everybody else isn't rocking it like you are." So mechanics came to me naturally. It's a bunch of problem solving. You have a correct answer at the end of solving the problem. I'll post in some videos that I did for teaching assistant for mechanics because I just loved it so much. Engineering shop was a class that you would go in and build things, and I actually have this dice that we ended up building and some other random things like letter holders and hammers. It was just fun. It was a way to get hands-on and actually be an engineer. Materials science. This is a class that I really don't remember. I think we learned things like stress and strain and different types of like breakage points of materials and different materials, but I didn't enjoy it, didn't pay that much attention, but it was easy as long as you went to class. Engineering physics 2, obviously you had to take as an engineer and as a pre-med, so this was a easy class as well. I think it got a little bit more complicated, but I liked physics, so it was good for me. Then we have human physiology. I honestly don't remember much from this class. I think I didn't go to any of the classes. I just studied the lecture slides, but it made sense. It was the basic things of like pulse, heart rate, temperature, just normal human physiology things. Probability and statistics for engineers was a math class I needed to take because I was a biomedical engineer, and this was more advanced statistics. Definitely, we even got into some R programming for it, but I think the professor did a very good job of explaining complicated concepts, so that was a little bit of a harder class. Then we have thermodynamics. Honestly, don't remember what thermodynamics even is. I don't think I've ever applied it since, so I'm just going to leave it at that. I thought it was confusing, made no sense. The teacher made no sense either, so I'm going to put it at towards the top, towards hard. Then we've got differential equations, so I had to take this math class because of engineering. It is not a pre-med requisite. Differential equations was basically more complex math, more calculus, more stuff, so it was definitely hard. I thought the professor was great though, so yeah, I've never used it since. Then we have ethics. I think I had to take an ethics class as a general education requirement. It's not a pre-med requirement or engineering, just in general. And again, going back to the fact that humanities are my weakness, I don't enjoy reading or writing essays. This was a lot of reading, a lot of writing, a lot of philosophy and Socratic seminars, not my forte. And professors just grade essays however they think they want to grade them, so yeah, it was hard. Finally, we have electrical engineering with lab. So this had to do with solving circuits, resistors and capacitors and all that stuff. I don't remember anything from it. I thought electrical engineering makes no sense to me conceptually. If I can't see it, feel it, or touch it, I just can't understand it. So I thought this was an extremely hard class, and the professor was not very good at explaining or simplifying concepts. And finally, the hardest class of sophomore year was BME computing. So this is when we started learning programming and MATLAB, and I thought this was like learning a completely alien language. I still don't understand it. I think this was one of the classes where it made no sense. No matter how much I tried, no matter how much I sat down and studied or tried to understand concepts or teach myself online, it just would not click in my brain. So I'm just going to say I think I was the closest to failing a final in BME computing if I have ever failed a final in my life before. All right, moving on to junior year. The easiest was Intro to Sociology. I like sociology and psychology, just having discussions, learning about humans, populations. It was a lot of fun. Then biomechanics, again, along the lines of mechanics, this was a follow-up and connected more to, medicine, so I really loved that class. Then we have junior lab and biomedical engineering instrumentation. I actually don't really remember what we did in these classes. I think we just did some random little experiments. We learned how to work with like ECG leads, EEG caps, and just doing a bunch of little different experiments. So it wasn't anything difficult. You just got to play around with things. Then transport fundamentals. If you ask me, I think the professor was horrendous in this class. Everything was very poorly explained, but the concepts weren't that complicated. It had to do with like mass transfer, fluid dynamics, things like that. But as you can see, my recollection is very poor, so I have not used it since. Biomaterials, this was a follow-up to materials, just making more connections to materials in medicine, like different types of sutures, different types of heart valves that you can use for heart valve replacements, or how you can use shark skin because it doesn't allow bacteria to grow. So it was more interesting, but there was a lot of content that we had to get through that made it difficult. Biochemistry. So I've taken biochemistry in med school, and I hated it in med school as much as I hated it in undergrad. These random little Krebs cycles and glycogenolysis, see, I don't even remember, but I just don't get them. I learn them and then I forget them every time. So I'm going to say it's hard for me just because it doesn't stick in my brain. And then signals and systems. So this is a combination of electrical engineering, so circuits, with basically advanced calculus and differential equations. So this was very hard. You had to problem solve. You had to know calculus and advanced math, but you also had to know circuits. So those were like my biggest weaknesses. And then the hardest junior year class for me was organic chemistry. That does not stick with me. That was basically learning yet another alien foreign language where it just made no sense, and I'll leave it at that. That's why it was hard. I just did not understand it. Visually, spatially, I think if I can't see something, if I can't touch it, then it just makes no sense to me. I'm sure that some people out there rock at organic chemistry. And finally, senior year, the hardest classes, the easiest classes. So I decided to take Spanish during my senior year just for fun, and I thought it was easy just because I had already learned a foreign language before. Then we have engineering entrepreneurship. This was a class, I would say probably one of my favorite classes that allowed you to apply things to real life. I think we got to shadow a startup that was creating different types of protein waffles, and then we also got to kind of conceptualize our own startup. I think we worked with some type of EEG cap for babies. It was just super cool, super fun, and hands-on and like application based. Then theological foundations. This was a requirement just for my school, so we delved into a lot of different religions and theology and things like that, but it was mainly a lot of essay writing again and reading, which again, not my forte, but it wasn't a hard class as long as you put in the work and the time to like study the concepts. Then linear algebra for engineers, as well as advanced math for engineers. So I was taking already so much math for biomedical engineering that I decided to take 2 more in order to get an engineering math minor, and I thought these were easier than calculus or differential equations. It went back to more basic like algebra style math, so these were okay. Senior project 1 and 2. So this is basically, if you're an engineer, I believe we all have to do a senior capstone project, and I worked in a team of 3, and it was a lot of fun. Obviously, it was a lot of hard work because there was no right or wrong answer. We were working on our own project, developing a lower extremity edema monitor. And with that, just went a lot of uncertainty and not having, you're problem solving, but there is no right or wrong answer. You're kind of just trying to learn and pivot as you go, but it was a lot of fun. And then quantitative physiology 1 and 2. So this was applying physiology concepts more to medical things. I think we looked at competitive eaters and how their stomachs adapted to eating so much food and how they trained their stomachs. So that was fascinating. And just looking at problem solving and doing equations when it comes to blood flow and urine output. So it was a lot more applicable to medicine, but it was more difficult because you had to problem solve more difficult equations and concepts. And finally, human movement mechanics. So this was probably the hardest class of senior year because it was applying the basic concepts of mechanics to actual human movement. If you are walking down the street, how are your legs moving? How are your hips in relationship to your ankles and knees and all that stuff, and analyzing it using programming and just a lot of more advanced concepts. So I think this was hard because it was just a culmination of a lot of different programs to analyze the human movement, as well as programming, as well as just doing a lot of different projects on real life applications. But it was a fun class because the professor was amazing. Now, out of the 4 hardest classes of every year, I'm going to tell you what was the hardest class for me out of all the BME classes. So the easiest would probably be human movement mechanics. It was just fun. As long as you put in the hard work, went in and got help from the professor, you were going to figure it out. I think I did a project about humans and how our bodies change if we live in space for a long amount of time. So it's interesting stuff. Then calculus 3 would definitely be harder. It's just kind of, if you don't get it, you don't get it. And you go to office hours and you try and get help, but you still don't get it. So no matter how much time you put in, it seems like nothing is connecting. And then organic chemistry 1 and 2, again, it was like a foreign language to me. I still don't get it. Maybe I need to learn it on a much more basic level. But then the hardest class overall, hands down, for me, out of all my BME Pre-Med curriculum, was BME computing. I found this to be completely foreign, not intuitive, did not make any sense. Professor did not help. Having friends help me did not help. Trying to look up things did not help. It was just not intuitive for me. And yeah, I think that was the closest I've ever gotten to failing a test ever. And I had a freak out moment. I was like, this is going to be the end of me. But now I'm looking back on it and I'm like, oh, doesn't even matter. I don't use it in my life anymore. Probably will never use it again. If I need to, I'll relearn it. But it just goes to show, don't stress things. If you don't do well in them, it's okay. We all have our strengths. As you can see, I really love mechanics and physics, but we also have our weaknesses. I really am bad at humanities, reading and writing essays, but that's why we're all different. So thank you all for tuning in. If you found this video helpful, interesting, entertaining, ranking BME classes, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.